The snow did not fall so much as it flew, driven horizontal by a wind that howled through the pines like something alive and hungry. The forest road outside Copper Creek, where it wound close to the frozen spine of the river, lay buried beneath drifts that erased all evidence of passage. All evidence, that is, except for two dark streaks that marred the pristine, white twin ribbons of blood that trailed from the wagon ruts and vanished into the deeper shadows of the trees. Evangeline Marsh lay where she had been thrown, her body curved around the bundle pressed against her chest. She was 23 years old, though the pain etched into every line of her face had aged her beyond reckoning. Her dress, once a respectable gray wool, now torn at the shoulder and soaked through with the dark rust of birth blood, clung to her legs in frozen folds. Her feet were bare. The shoes had been lost somewhere between the ranch house and this forsaken stretch of road, kicked off, or simply fallen away as they dragged her into the wagon bed. She had tried to crawl. The evidence lay behind her in those terrible scarlet trails, each one marking a moment when she had clawed forward another few inches before her strength failed. Now she could only curl tighter around the infant in her arms, trying to shield the child from the wind that cut through them both like 1,000 small knives. The baby, a girl, though Evangeline had not yet named her, whimpered against her mother's chest. The sound was thin, barely audible above the storm, but it was enough. Enough to keep Evangeline's eyes open when they wanted to close. Enough to make her lungs drag in one more breath of air so cold it burned. She thought of her mother, dead 3 years now, who had warned her that the West was no place for gentle women. She thought of the sea she would never see again and the gray Atlantic that had carried her family to America when she was 10. She thought of the boarding house in Dragonfly Creek, where she had worked as a seamstress, sitting by the window with a needle and thread, dreaming of something more than threadbare curtains and other people's mending. The letter had promised orchards, apple trees heavy with fruit, a ranch house with glass windows and a view of the mountains, a man who needed a wife and would treat her with respect. Every word had been a lie. Then she heard it, not the wind this time, but something else, something rhythmic and deliberate. Hoofbeats. Through the veil of falling snow, a shape emerged. A man on horseback, moving slowly along the road, as if searching for something. He was wrapped in buckskin and furs, his dark hair hanging in 2 long braids that swayed with the motion of his mount. A war bonnet trailed down his back, the feathers sodden and heavy with snow. Steam poured from the horse's nostrils in great white plumes. The rider stopped. For a long moment he sat perfectly still, his eyes scanning the tree line. Evangeline could see him clearly now, the painted lines on his cheekbones, the Winchester rifle resting across his thighs, the way his hand moved instinctively to the stock when he spotted the dark shapes in the snow. She knew what he was. The word savage had been thrown around so often in Copper Creek that it had lost all meaning. But here, in this frozen moment, faced with a Cheyenne warrior who could kill her with a single shot or simply ride away and let the cold finish what the storm had started, Evangeline understood then that her life hung on the decision of a stranger. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Instead, she simply held the baby tighter and waited. The warrior swung down from his horse. His boots, knee-high moccasins wrapped with strips of fur, crunched in the snow as he approached. He moved with the caution of a man who had learned to expect ambushes, his rifle held ready, his eyes never stopping their sweep of the surrounding forest. When he reached her, he knelt and studied the scene with an intensity that made Evangeline want to look away. But she forced herself to meet his gaze. If she was going to die, she would do it looking her killer in the eye. "Please," she whispered, and the word came out as little more than a breath. "Please do not hurt her." The warrior's eyes flicked to the bundle in her arms, then to the frozen rope still tied around her ankle, then to the wagon tracks already half filled with fresh snow. His jaw tightened. When he spoke, his English was rough but clear. "Who did this?" Evangeline's lips moved, but no sound came. The warrior, his name was Tai. though she would not learn this for hours yet, reached into the parfleche bag tied to his saddle and pulled out a water skin. He held it to her lips, tilting it just enough to let a trickle of water slide into her mouth. "Who?" he asked again. "My husband," she managed. Ty's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. He looked at the tracks again, then at the blood-soaked snow, and then at the baby who had begun to cry in earnest, now a thin wail that spoke of cold and hunger and the terrible fragility of new life. He could ride away. No one would blame him. His people had been hunted, shot-hanged for lesser offenses than stopping to help a white woman. 3 young men from his band had been found dangling from a cottonwood tree last summer, accused of stealing cattle they had never touched. The memory of their swollen faces still visited Ty in dreams. But he thought of his sister Little Dove, taken 6 years ago by men who promised to educate her in the ways of civilization, and something in the set of this woman's jaw, the fierce way she clutched her child even as death closed in, reminded him of that day, of the screaming, of his own helplessness, of his own. He had ridden away then. He would not do so now. Ty stripped off his buffalo robe and wrapped it around mother and child in one smooth motion. Evangeline gasped as the warmth enveloped her, sudden and almost painful after the numbing cold. He lifted her with surprising gentleness, careful not to jostle the baby, and settled her across his horse's withers. Then he swung up behind her, his arm coming around to steady them both. "Now where—" Evangeline started to ask, but he cut her off. "Not far, old cabin. You live, maybe?" The horse moved forward, picking its way through the drifts. Behind them, the crimson trails in the snow were already disappearing beneath fresh fall. Within an hour, there would be no evidence that anything had happened here at all. 6 months earlier, the stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the mercantile, and Evangeline stepped down onto planks slick with horse manure and mud. Copper Creek spread before her in a collection of false-fronted buildings that promised more than they delivered: a bank, 2 saloons, a livery, and a scattering of houses that clung to the hillside like barnacles to a ship's hull. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks white with snow, even in early autumn. She clutched her carpetbag with one hand and the letter with the other, reading it for perhaps the 100th time since leaving Dragonfly Creek. The paper was soft from handling the ink, beginning to blur at the folds. "Miss Marsh, your letter has found me in good spirits and better health. I am pleased to accept your proposal of marriage sight unseen, trusting in the judgment of Mrs. Patterson's referral. My ranch lies 10 miles west of Copper Creek, with good water, arable land, and an orchard that my late wife planted some years back. I am in need of a helpmeet to manage the household, and God willing bear children to inherit what I have built. I am a man of modest means, but honest work. You will want for nothing here. Yours in anticipation, Jebediah Cole." Nothing in the letter had mentioned that Jebediah Cole was a man in his mid-40s, with eyes like chips of winter ice. Nothing had prepared her for the way he looked her over in front of half the town, checking her teeth as if she were a horse at auction, squeezing her arm to judge the muscle there. "Good hips," he announced to no one in particular. "You will do." Evangeline felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her eyes down. She had sold everything she owned to pay for the journey west. There was no money to go back, even if she had somewhere to return to. Her mother was dead. Her brother was dead. The boarding house had filled her position within a week of her departure. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to have something of her own. Jebediah grabbed her bag without asking and jerked his head toward a wagon hitched at the end of the street. "We leave now. I do not like to travel after dark." "Mr. Cole, Evangeline started, but he was already walking away. A man stepped out of a doorway, marked with a sign that read, "NN, Ward Physician." He was thin and gray-haired, with the kind of face that suggested he had seen too much and slept too little. He looked at Evangeline with an expression she could not quite read: pity, perhaps, or guilt. "Miss Marsh," he said quietly, falling into step beside her as she followed Jebediah. My name is Dr. Nathaniel Ward. If you ever have need of medical attention, my office is on Spanish Street. I keep a lantern in the window at night." There was something in the way he said it, an emphasis on ever a wait to the words that made Evangeline pause. She looked at him properly then, and saw in his eyes a warning he could not speak aloud. "Thank you, doctor," she said. He nodded, touching the brim of his hat, and watched as she climbed into the wagon beside a man she had never met, heading toward a life she could not imagine. The ranch house was exactly as disappointing as the town had been. The orchard existed, but the trees were gnarled and neglected, most of them barren. The house itself was a squat structure with peeling paint and a roof that sagged in the middle like the spine of an old horse. Chickens pecked in the yard. A dog on a chain barked once, then lay down in the dirt. A man emerged from the barn, thin with haunted eyes, and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. He took Evangeline's bag without meeting her gaze. "This is Conrad," Jebediah said. "He works for me. You need something done, you tell him." Conrad nodded once and carried the bag inside. Evangeline followed, her shoes squelching in the mud. The interior of the house was dim and smelled of stale smoke and unwashed dishes. A table dominated the main room, scarred and stained. A cast-iron stove sat in one corner, cold. The bedroom was even worse, a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a trunk pushed against one wall, and a strange starburst crack in the plaster above the headboard. "Supper is at 6, Jebediah said from the doorway. "I expect it hot and ready. Conrad will show you where things are kept." He left without another word. Evangeline sat on the edge of the bed and felt the thin mattress compress beneath her. Through the walls, she could hear the wind beginning to rise, whistling through gaps in the chinked logs. That night, she learned that Jebediah Cole considered her an investment. He said as much, his hands rough and his breath sour with whiskey. "I paid for you," he reminded her when she flinched. "Transportation, the matchmaker's fee close. You owe me a return on that investment. A son to carry my name." Evangeline stared at the crack in the wall and wondered how it had gotten there. Later she would learn. Later, when her own head nearly put a matching crack beside it. The days settled into a brutal routine. She woke before dawn to light the stove and make coffee. She cooked meals for Jebediah, and Conrad washed clothes in creek water so cold it made her hands ache, hauled firewood, tended the chickens, and tried to stay out of Jebediah's way when his temper turned dark. Conrad was not unkind, but he was distant. He worked from sunup to sundown, mending fences, tending the few cattle Jebediah kept, and avoiding eye contact with everyone. At night, Evangeline sometimes heard him sitting outside the bunkhouse, the soft whisper of a knife on wood as he carved. One evening in late September, she found him bent over a piece of pine, working with surprising delicacy to shape a tiny deer no bigger than her thumb. "That is beautiful," she said. Conrad's hands went still. For a moment she thought he would not respond, but then he looked up at her with those haunted eyes. "My daughter liked these," he said, his accent thick. "In Germany before we came. She died when she was 4. Fever." Evangeline felt her throat tighten. "I am sorry." Her name was Anna. He turned the carving over in his palm. "She had dark hair like yours, always laughing even when there was nothing to be happy about. I thought—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I thought in America everything would be better. Land of opportunity, they say. And it was not. I have been here 8 years. I own nothing. I work for a man who beats his animals," and he cut himself off, shaking his head. "I should not speak of this." "And what?" Evangeline pressed, though part of her did not want to know. Conrad looked at her for a long moment, then away. "There was a woman before you. Constance, her name was. She lasted 7 months. They said she fell from the barn loft." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When he unfolded it, Evangeline saw another carving, a small bird, its wings half spread. I found this in the bunkhouse when I first came to work here. Another man lived there before me. He left it behind, along with a few other things. I kept it because—" He trailed off. Because whoever made it was young. You can tell by the way the knife slipped here and here. A child's work, but careful. Someone taught them. He wrapped the bird again and tucked it away. I think about that sometimes. Who made it? Where they are now. Evangeline wanted to ask more, but footsteps sounded on the porch and Conrad was on his feet in an instant, the half-finished deer disappearing into his pocket. Jebediah filled the doorway, his bulk blocking the lamplight. "Why are you not inside?" he asked Evangeline, his voice deceptively mild. "I was just—" "Get inside, now." She went. Behind her, she heard Jebediah say something to Conrad in a low voice, and then the sound of a blow. She did not look back. By October, Evangeline knew she was pregnant. The realization came not with joy, but with a leaden dread that settled in her stomach and never left. She thought of Constance dead at 22. She thought of the crack in the bedroom wall and the way Jebediah's hands became fists when he drank. She thought of running, but where would she go? She had no money. The nearest town was 10 miles away, through country where wolves howled at night and winter came early. And even if she made it to Copper Creek, what then? A pregnant woman alone would find no work, no shelter, no mercy. So she stayed. She hauled water and cooked meals and felt the child growing inside her like a countdown to catastrophe. Dr. Nathaniel rode out in mid-October after Conrad sent word that the mistress was coughing blood. He found Evangeline in the kitchen, her face pale and a bruise yellowing on her ribs, where a fall had supposedly occurred. Nathaniel examined her with gentle hands, his face giving nothing away. When he was done, he found Jebediah in the yard and spoke with quiet intensity. "You break this woman, there will be no son to inherit your land. Only a grave to mark your pride." Jebediah smiled without warmth. "Graves are cheap, Doctor. Women are cheaper. Mrs. Patterson in Dragonfly Creek has a ledger full of desperate girls looking for husbands. One dies, another comes. That is the way of the world." Nathaniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I could report you." For what? An accidental fall. A woman's frailty. Jebediah leaned closer. "You signed off on Constance's death, Doctor. Accidental, you said. If you suddenly develop a conscience, now people might wonder what else you have been lying about." The doctor left without another word. But that night, he sat in his office with Constance's death certificate spread before him and a bottle of whiskey at his elbow. He remembered the way her neck had bent at an impossible angle, the way her fingers had been broken, as if she had grabbed for something or someone to arrest her fall. "What kind of man are you?" he asked his reflection in the window. "What kind of coward signs a lie and calls it medicine?" The reflection had no answer, but something shifted in Nathaniel that night. He could not save Constance, but perhaps if he was brave enough, he could save the next one. Winter came early that year. By mid-November, snow lay 3 feet deep across the prairie, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in the well. Evangeline's pregnancy advanced with grim inevitability. She grew thin everywhere except her belly, her hands shaking when she lifted the heavy water buckets, her breath coming in short gasps that spoke of lungs laboring under the weight of new life. Jebediah watched her with calculation in his eyes. "Better be a boy," he said one night, his hand resting possessively on her swollen stomach. "Better be a son to make all this worthwhile." Evangeline did not answer. She lay awake long after Jebediah began to snore, one hand on her belly, feeling the child move. A daughter, she thought, though she had no way of knowing. A daughter who would never know her father. A daughter who would be free. She did not know how prophetic that thought would be, or what price freedom would demand. The labor began on a night when the wind screamed like something mortally wounded, and snow fell so thick that Conrad could not see the barn from the bunkhouse window. Evangeline's water broke just after midnight, a hot flood that soaked through the thin mattress. The pain followed waves of it, relentless and crushing. "Get Martha," Jebediah ordered Conrad. "And be quick about it." But Martha, Jebediah's sister, who lived 3 miles away, could not be reached. The storm had made the roads impassable. Conrad returned alone, his face white with more than cold, and found Jebediah pacing the kitchen while Evangeline screamed in the next room. "Then you will have to help," Jebediah said. "I do not know how. You delivered calves, did you not? It cannot be much different." It was different. Terribly, obviously different. Conrad's hands shook as he tried to remember what his mother had done when his sister was born decades ago in a village he could barely picture. He boiled water because that seemed like the thing to do. He tore sheets into strips. He held Evangeline's hand while she screamed, her grip strong enough to leave bruises. The hours dragged. Blood soaked, the bed dripped onto the floor. Evangeline's screams faded to hoarse gasps. Her eyes rolled back in her head. "Push," Conrad urged, because that was what his mother had said. "You must push." And finally, just before dawn, a baby slid into his trembling hands, tiny and red and furious at being born into a world this cold and cruel. The infant's cry filled the room, high and clear and unmistakably alive. Jebediah stood in the doorway. He looked at the baby, at the blood, at Evangeline's gray face. "Well, a girl," Conrad whispered. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "A girl." Jebediah's voice was flat. "All that trouble, all that expense, for a girl. She is healthy," Conrad said, trying to wrap the infant in a clean cloth. "She will live." "I did not ask if she would live." Jebediah turned on his heel. "Hitch the wagon." Conrad stared at him. "What? You heard me. Hitch the wagon. We are taking care of this." "Mr. Cole, the storm—" "Now, Conrad. Or you can go with them." Conrad's hands went numb. He looked at Evangeline, barely conscious, at the baby in his arms, who had done nothing wrong except be born the wrong sex. He thought of Anna, his daughter, who had died before she could grow old enough to disappoint anyone. "Please," he whispered. "Mr. Cole, please, they will not survive. That is the point." Jebediah's face was carved from stone. "I did not pay for damaged goods. If the child cannot carry my name, it is worthless. And if the mother cannot produce an heir, she is worse than worthless. She is a liability." Conrad wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to be the kind of man who could stand up to a bully and damn the consequences. But he thought of the beatings he had endured when he questioned Jebediah before. He thought of the $3 a week that kept him fed. He thought of how very much he wanted to live, even if living meant becoming complicit in something monstrous. He hitched the wagon. They carried Evangeline out into the screaming wind, Conrad taking her shoulders, Jebediah her feet. She was barely conscious, her eyes rolling, her lips moving soundlessly. The baby stayed clutched against her chest because even Jebediah could not quite bring himself to touch an infant that, fresh from the womb, still slicked with blood and vernix. Conrad drove. His hands were so numb he could barely feel the reins. The horses struggled through drifts that rose to their chests, their breath coming in great plumes of steam. The world had vanished into a white void where direction lost all meaning. "There," Jebediah said, pointing to a place where the road bent close to the river. Pines crowded the banks, their branches heavy with snow. "This will do." They hauled Evangeline down. She hit the snow hard, and the impact forcing a small sound from her throat, the first noise she had made since they left the ranch. Conrad cut the rope they had tied around her ankle to keep her from sliding out of the wagon bed, his hands shaking so badly the knife nearly slipped. Jebediah threw a thin blanket over mother and child. It was a token gesture, meaningless in the face of the storm. But it seemed to satisfy something in him, some need to pretend this was not murder. If anyone asks, he said to Conrad, she ran off. Women do that sometimes. Get it in their heads that they want to go back east and they just walk away. Happens all the time. Conrad nodded. He could not speak, could not look at the shapes in the snow. They climbed back into the wagon. The wheels creaked as they turned. Within minutes, fresh snow had begun to fill their tracks. On the ridge above Tai and his hunting band moved through the storm like ghosts. They had been in the high country for 3 days, tracking elk through terrain that would kill a white man in hours. Their pack horses carried meat enough to see the band through the worst of winter, and their spirits were high despite the cold. Then Tai spotted the wagon. He reined in his horse and watched as 2 figures dragged something from the bed and dumped it in the snow. Even from this distance, even through the curtain of falling snow, he could see what they were doing. Could read the story in the way they moved, quick and furtive, like men disposing of trash. Not our trouble, Red Hawk said beside him. The older warrior's face was impassive. White men's business. Tai said nothing. He watched the wagon pull away, watched the shapes in the snow resolve into something that moved slowly, barely, but moved nonetheless. He thought of Little Dove, of the day 6 years ago when soldiers came to their camp with papers that said they were authorized to take children for education. The way his sister had screamed as they pulled her onto a horse. The way she had reached for him, her small hand outstretched, and he had been held back by 2 men with rifles who promised that resisting would mean death for the entire band. He had let her go because he had no choice. He had spent 6 years looking for her, following rumors and half-truths, traveling to every mission school and settlement within 100 miles. All for nothing. But this was a choice. This was a moment where he could act, instead of simply endure. I go down, he said. Red Hawk studied him. If white men see you with their woman, they will hang you. Then I will not be seen. He guided his horse down the slope, leaving the hunting band behind. Snow covered his tracks almost as quickly as he made them. By the time he reached the road, he might as well have appeared from nowhere, a spirit conjured by the storm. The woman lay exactly as they had left her. Blood stained the snow in a spreading pool. The baby, he could see it now wrapped in a blanket so thin it was nearly transparent, moved weakly against her chest. Tai dismounted and knelt. The woman's eyes opened pale blue, ringed with exhaustion and pain. He saw the moment she recognized what he was, saw the fear flicker across her face. Please, she whispered. Please do not hurt her. Tai looked at the baby, at the crimson trails leading back toward the road, at the cut rope trailing from the woman's ankle. He pieced together the story in seconds, a mail-order bride perhaps. A difficult birth. A husband who had no use for daughters. Who did this, he asked. Her lips moved, but no sound came. He gave her water from his water skin, holding her head up with one hand while she drank. My husband, she managed finally. Tai nodded slowly. He had seen enough of white men's cruelty to believe it. His own people had been driven from their lands, their treaties broken before the ink dried, their children stolen in the name of civilization. One more atrocity was hardly surprising, but it was preventable. This at least he could stop. He stripped off his buffalo robe, a treasure tanned to butter-soft perfection, and decorated with quill work his mother had done before she died, and wrapped it around mother and child. The woman gasped at the sudden warmth. Her fingers clutched at the fur with desperate strength. I take you somewhere safe, Tai said. Old trapper cabin 1 hour north. You live, maybe. They will kill you if they find you with me. Yes. She looked at him, then really looked, and something passed between them, an understanding that they were both caught in a world that wanted them dead for different reasons, but dead nonetheless. Then why? Tai thought of Little Dove. Of all the moments when someone could have intervened and chose not to. Because no one should die like this, he said simply. He lifted her onto his horse with care that belied his strength. She weighed almost nothing, this small, fierce creature who had crawled through snow with her baby, rather than simply lie down and let death take her easily. He swung up behind her, one arm wrapped around them both to keep them steady, and turned his horse toward the river. Behind them, the crimson trails slowly disappeared beneath fresh snow. The storm erased all evidence that anything had happened here. For the white men who would come looking there would be nothing to find. Just another woman who ran away, another tragedy to shrug off before supper. But Tyee knew, and the woman knew. And the baby who would one day grow up to hear this story would know too. Sometimes knowing is enough. Sometimes that is where justice begins. The river crossing was treacherous. Ice had formed along the banks, extending in sheets toward the center, where the current still ran black and swift. Tyee dismounted and led the horse, testing each step with his weight, before trusting it with the burden he carried. Halfway across, the ice groaned, a deep, resonant sound that Tyee felt in his bones. He froze, spreading his weight, breathing slowly. The horse snorted and tossed its head. Behind him, the woman made a small sound, fear or prayer he could not tell. Another step. The groan grew louder. Cracks appeared, racing out from beneath his feet like black lightning. "Hold on," Tyee said, though he knew she could not hold any tighter than she already was. He shouted and slapped the horse's flank. The animal lunged forward, hooves slipping, finding purchase, lunging again. Behind them, a plate of ice the size of a wagon bed dropped away, with a sound like breaking glass. Dark water surged up through the gap, steaming in the frigid air. They made the far bank with seconds to spare. Tyee did not pause to celebrate. He remounted and drove the horse up the slope into the timber where the snow lay deeper, but the ice could not betray them. The cabin appeared almost by accident, buried so deeply in snow that only the shape of it gave away its existence. Tyee had found it last autumn while tracking deer. The trapper who built it was long gone dead or simply moved on, but the structure remained sound. 4 walls, a roof, a stove with most of its chimney intact. He kicked the door open and carried the woman inside. The interior was freezing the air, stale and thick with the smell of old smoke and mouse droppings. Ancient traps hung from nails driven into the walls. A rickety table stood in one corner, its surface gray with dust. But it was shelter. It was survival. Tyee lowered the woman onto the floor near the stove and began working with the swift efficiency of a man who has lived his entire life one mistake away from death. He broke apart an old crate, feeding the pieces into the stove, along with a handful of dried moss from his pack. He struck sparks with flint and steel, blowing gently on the nascent flames until they caught and spread. The woman watched him through half-closed eyes. The baby had gone silent, a worse sign than crying. Tyee knew enough to recognize the dangerous stillness of a child sliding toward hypothermia. "She must eat," he said. "The baby, she must eat soon." "I know." The woman's voice was barely a whisper. "Help me sit up." He did, supporting her weight while she fumbled with her dress, trying to expose a breast for nursing. Her hands shook too badly to manage the buttons. Tyee hesitated, then reached out and unfastened them himself, his touch clinical and impersonal. The woman flushed, but did not protest. The baby latched on with surprising strength and began to suckle. The woman's head fell back against Tyee's shoulder, too exhausted to hold herself upright. He could feel her heartbeat fast and irregular, and the heat coming off her skin spoke of fever beginning its work. While she nursed, Tyee examined her injuries. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. He packed clean snow against her thighs, knowing it was a poor substitute for proper care, but better than nothing. He found dried willow bark in his pack, good for pain and fever, and made a tea from melted snow and the shavings. "Drink," he said, holding the cup to her lips. She obeyed without question, trusting him, because she had no choice. When the baby had drunk her fill and fallen into the heavy sleep of the newborn, Tyee wrapped them both in every blanket and fur he could find. The cabin was warming slowly, the stove radiating heat that pushed back the worst of the cold. Only then did Tai allow himself to sit. His shoulder ached where an old injury from a riding accident still troubled him in cold weather. His fingers were numb despite the gloves. But he was alive, and so was the woman and her child. That would have to be enough. "What is your name?" the woman asked, her voice so quiet he almost missed it. "Tai. I am Evangeline." She looked down at the baby. "And this is—" I had not named her yet. I did not think I would have the chance. "You have it now." Evangeline's eyes filled with tears. "Mabel," she whispered. "After my mother. Her name is Mabel." The days that followed took on a strange, suspended quality, as if they had stepped outside of time into a place where the normal rules did not apply. The storm blew itself out after 2 days, leaving the world buried beneath drifts that turned the forest into an alien landscape of white hills and hidden hollows. Tai went out each morning to hunt, returning with rabbits, or on one fortunate day, a turkey that had been too frozen to flee. He showed Evangeline how to stretch the meat, making it last, by boiling the bones for broth and saving every scrap of fat. He taught her which plants could be eaten even in winter, the inner bark of poplar trees, the dried berries that clung to certain bushes, the roots that could be dug from beneath the snow. She in turn taught him bits of English that he had never learned in his few encounters with traders. She corrected his grammar, gently showing him how to structure sentences in ways that would not mark him immediately as a savage in the white world. Neither spoke of what would happen when the snow melted. That future was too uncertain, too frightening. Better to focus on the present, on keeping the fire lit, on making sure Mabel stayed warm and fed, on surviving one more day. But on the 5th night, when the cabin had grown as warm as it was going to get and Mabel slept peacefully in her mother's arms, Evangeline broke the silence. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "For me, I mean. You could have ridden past." Tai stared into the fire, watching the flames dance across half-burned wood. "I had a sister," he said finally. "Little Dove. She was 12 when the soldiers came. They said they were taking children to teach them English, to make them civilized. They said the families could visit." "Did they?" "No. The school was 3 days' ride away. They told us we needed special papers to visit, papers that cost money we did not have. And then one day I rode there anyway, ready to fight if I must. They said she had run away. They said she left in the night and no one knew where she went. You do not believe them. Would you?" Evangeline thought of Constance, the woman who supposedly fell from a barn loft. "No, I would not. I have looked for 6 years. Every town, every settlement, every mission school within 200 miles. I have asked traders, soldiers, missionaries. No one has seen her. No one knows anything." His hands curled into fists. "Sometimes I think she is dead. Sometimes I hope she is, because the alternative, that she is alive and suffering, waiting for me to find her, is worse than death. I am sorry. You say that word often. Sorry. Does it help?" "No." Evangeline looked down at Mabel. "Nothing helps. But we say it anyway because the alternative is silence, and silence feels like giving up." They sat without speaking for a long time. Two broken people bound together by circumstance and the determination to survive. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, hunting calls that echoed through the frozen forest. Tai rose and checked the door, making sure it was secure. The cabin was small enough that nothing larger than a fox could push its way inside. But old habits died hard. When he returned to the fire, Evangeline was trying to stand. Her legs shook beneath her, barely able to support her weight. Tai caught her elbow before she could fall. "I need to walk," she said through gritted teeth. "I need to move, or I will go mad." "You will hurt yourself." "I am already hurt. I would rather be hurt and moving than hurt and still." He understood that impulse, so he helped her. They walked in slow circles around the cabin, 10 steps to the door, 10 steps back, over and over, until Evangeline's legs gave out and she had to sit. But the next day, she walked 20 steps. The day after that, 30. On the 7th day, she made it all the way around the cabin without stopping. Tayi nodded approval and handed her his Winchester. "You must learn to shoot." Evangeline stared at the rifle. It was a Winchester Model 1873, the gun that won the West, as white traders like to call it. She had never held a firearm in her life. The weight of it shocked her, heavier than she expected, the wood and steel cold, even through her gloves. "I do not know how. I teach you." He set a bottle on a stump 20 paces from the cabin door. Then he showed her how to hold the rifle, how to fit the stock against her shoulder, how to line up the sights. His hands adjusted her grip, impersonal but sure, and she felt the warmth of him at her back for just a moment before he stepped away. "Breathe out slow. When lungs empty, pull trigger." Evangeline did as instructed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with surprising violence. The shot went wide, missing the bottle by a full yard. But she had fired a gun. She had stood on her own 2 feet and held a weapon and made it speak. The feeling was intoxicating. "Again," Tayi said. She fired until her shoulder ached and her ears rang. She hit the bottle on her 10th shot, shattering it in a spray of brown glass. Tayi almost smiled, a brief quirk of his mouth that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Good," he said. "Tomorrow we practice more." That night, after Mabel had been fed and was sleeping in the nest of blankets they had made for her, Evangeline asked the question that had been building in her since the day Tayi found her. "What happens when we leave here?" Tayi did not answer immediately. He fed another piece of wood into the stove and watched it catch fire before he spoke. "You go back to Copper Creek. Tell them what your husband did. They will do nothing." Evangeline's voice was flat. "Jebediah Cole owns half the grazing land in this territory. He provides work for dozens of men. No judge will convict him on the word of a woman who ran away from her marriage vows. Then you go somewhere else, back east. With what money I sold everything I owned to come west. I have nothing. I am nothing. You are alive. Your daughter is alive. That is something. Is it?" Evangeline felt something crack open inside her, all the fear and rage and helplessness she had been holding back since the moment she climbed into Jebediah's wagon. Alive to do what? To work as a washerwoman, a whore, to watch my daughter grow up hungry and desperate and alone. Better alive and hungry than dead and at peace. Is it, I wonder sometimes? Tayi turned to look at her fully, then his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. You think I do not wonder the same. Every day I wake and my sister is still gone. Every day I search and find nothing. But I wake anyway. I search anyway. Because the alternative is giving up, and I will not give him that satisfaction. Whoever took her, whoever is keeping her from me. I do not even know his name, but I hate him with everything I am. And someday, if there is any justice in this world, I will find him. And I will make him tell me where she is, even if I have to break every bone in his body to do it. The vehemence in his voice shocked Evangeline. She had grown accustomed to his quiet competence, his careful control. This glimpse of the rage beneath the fury that he carried like a second skin reminded her that he was not a tame man, not safe, just temporarily aligned with her survival. But instead of frightening her, it gave her hope. Because if Tayi could carry that much anger and still function, still survive, then perhaps she could too. I will not go back to him, she said quietly. Whatever happens wherever we go when we leave this cabin, I will not go back to Jebediah Cole. I would rather die. You will not die. Tayi said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. You are stronger than you think. Your husband, he thought you would lie down and freeze. But you crawled, you fought, You kept your daughter alive against all reason. That is not weakness. That is steel. Evangeline looked at her hands raw and cracked from cold, still bearing the scars of her desperate flight through the snow. I do not feel strong. Steel does not feel strong until it is tested. You have been tested. You did not break. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel that steel he claimed to see in her. But all she felt was exhausted and afraid and trapped in a future that offered nothing but pain. Tai must have seen it in her face because he reached into his pack and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were glass beads, blue and white and red, and a sewing awl with thread made from sinew. My mother used to make these, he said, handing her the pouch. When she was sad or angry, she would sit and bead. She said it helped her remember that beautiful things could still exist in an ugly world. Evangeline took the pouch, her fingers trembling. I do not know how. I teach you. So they sat by the fire, while Tai showed her the patterns his mother had taught him, geometric designs that told stories without words. Evangeline's first attempts were clumsy, the beads uneven, and the thread too loose. But by the end of the night, she had completed a small strip of beadwork that could be sewn onto a dress or a moccasin or a sling for carrying babies. It is not much, she said, holding it up to the light. It is something, Tai replied. Tomorrow it will be more. Meanwhile, in Copper Creek, Dr. Nathaniel Ward sat in his office and tried to convince himself that what he was about to do was not suicide. The papers were spread across his desk. Constance's death certificate, the receipts from the matchmaker in Dragonfly Creek, the ledger he had found tucked behind a loose board in the wall of the Copper Creek land office. The ledger belonged to Jebediah Cole, and it detailed transactions that made Nathaniel's stomach turn. 7 women. 7 brides purchased through Mrs. Patterson's service over the course of 8 years. 2 had left Cole's employment, or so the notes said, returning east with funds provided for their journey. 5 had died. Constance's name was there, along with Margaret, Elizabeth, Sarah, and Catherine. Cause of death, varied childbirth complications, influenza accidents, but the pattern was unmistakable. And now Evangeline. The 8th name. Status missing, presumed dead. Nathaniel had broken into Cole's ranch house to find these papers, risking everything on a hunch and a guilty conscience. What he had found was worse than he feared. But it was also proof. Undeniable, damning proof. He reached for the bottle of whiskey on his desk, then stopped himself. He needed to be clear-headed for what came next. There was a knock on the door. Nathaniel tensed his hand, moving instinctively toward the revolver he kept in the top drawer. Come in. Conrad entered, his face pale and his eyes haunted. He held his hat in both hands, twisting the brim. Dr. Ward, I need to talk to you. About Mr. Cole, about the woman. Nathaniel gestured to the chair across from his desk. Conrad sat, but he perched on the edge of the seat, as if ready to bolt at any moment. What about her? Conrad's throat worked. We left her in the snow, after the baby was born. He made me drive the wagon, and we took her out to the river road, and... His voice broke. We left her there to die. Nathaniel's hands curled into fists. Where? 10 miles north, by the old trapper's cabin turnoff. When? 9 days ago. Then she's already dead. Maybe. Conrad pulled something from his pocket, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. But maybe not. I have been thinking about this, about something I found years ago when I first came to work for Mr. Cole. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a tiny carved bird, its wings spread as if in flight. The workmanship was rough, clearly the work of a child, but there was something careful about it too, something deliberate. I found this in the bunkhouse, Conrad said. The man who lived there before me, he said a little girl made it, an Indian girl. Mr. Cole brought her to the ranch about 7 years ago. He said he was taking her to a mission school in Denver. But the hired man, he saw money change hands. He said Mr. Cole sold her. Nathaniel went very still. Sold her to whom? A woman who ran a house on Larimer Street. I do not know which one. But the hired man, before he left, he wrote down the address. Said it did not sit right with him what was done. He left the address hidden in the bunk where I sleep. 1247 Larimer Street. Nathaniel pulled the ledger closer and began flipping through pages. He found the entry 3 pages in received payment $50 for domestic servant Indian girl age 12. Delivery arranged via S. Mitchell, Denver. Holy mother of... Nathaniel breathed. He looked up at Conrad. Do you know what this means, if we can prove Cole sold a child into slavery? It means we are both dead men if he finds out we know. Conrad's hands shook. Dr. Ward, I did not come here to be a hero. I came here because I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. Every time I close my eyes, I see that woman crawling in the snow with her baby. I see my daughter Anna's face looking at me like she is ashamed of what I have become. Then help me, Nathaniel said. Help me make this right. You how? Even if we find proof, even if we get the authorities involved, Cole has friends in the territorial government. He will walk away clean, and you and I will disappear into unmarked graves. Not if we move fast. Not if we get Evangeline out of there before Cole realizes she's still alive. Conrad stared at him. You think she survived? I think someone might have found her. The Cheyenne use that area for hunting. If a warrior passed by at the right time, then she is dead for certain. No Indian is going to risk his neck for a white woman. But Nathaniel was already pulling on his coat. We ride north, tonight. We find out one way or another. Conrad wanted to refuse. Wanted to go back to the bunkhouse and pretend this conversation had never happened. But he thought of Anna, who would have been 10 years old now if the fever had not taken her. He thought of the woman Evangeline who had held her baby with such desperate strength even as death closed in. All right, he said. We ride. But if we die, I want it on record that this was your idea. Noted. They left within the hour, riding north through snow that muffled the sound of their horses' hooves. Behind them, Copper Creek slept. Ahead, somewhere in the frozen wilderness, a woman and her child clung to life in a forgotten cabin. And in between, Jebediah Cole slept the dreamless sleep of a man who had never questioned his right to dispose of inconvenient lives. But that sleep would not last. The reckoning was coming, carried on the backs of 2 desperate men and 1 carved wooden bird. The snow had stopped falling. But the cold remained a deep, bone-penetrating cold that turned breath to ice crystals and made every movement an agony. Nathaniel and Conrad followed the river north, their horses struggling through drifts that sometimes rose to their chests. How much farther? Conrad asked, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his face. Another 2 miles, maybe 3. They pressed on. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful if they were not fighting for their lives against the temperature. Nathaniel's medical bag was tied to his saddle, bouncing with every step. Inside were bandages, laudanum, a bottle of carbolic acid, and his instruments. If they found Evangeline alive, she would need all of it and more. They almost missed the turnoff. The cabin was so deeply buried in snow that only the stone chimney gave away its location. But there was smoke rising from that chimney, thin and gray, but undeniably smoke. Someone is there, Nathaniel whispered. They dismounted and approached on foot, trying to stay quiet. Nathaniel's hand moved to his revolver. Conrad carried an old Army Springfield that had seen better days. Neither man was a fighter, but both were desperate enough to try. The door opened before they reached it. A man stood in the opening, dark-skinned, dressed in buckskins and furs, holding a Winchester rifle pointed directly at Nathaniel's chest. "Who are you?" the man asked in heavily accented English. "Dr. Nathaniel Ward. We are looking for a woman, Evangeline Marsh. She..." is inside. You are the doctor from Copper Creek. Yes. Is she alive? The man Tai, though Nathaniel did not know this yet, lowered his rifle fractionally. She lives. The baby lives. But they cannot travel. Not yet. We are not here to take her anywhere. We are here to help. Nathaniel glanced at Conrad. May we come in? Tai studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped aside. The interior of the cabin was warmer than Nathaniel expected. A fire crackled in the stove. Evangeline sat near it, wrapped in furs with a baby sleeping against her chest. She looked up when they entered, and Nathaniel saw hope and fear war across her face. Dr. Ward, Miss Marsh, thank God. He crossed to her and knelt, his hands already reaching for his bag. How are you feeling? Like I should be dead. You very nearly were. He began examining her, checking her pulse, her breathing, the color of her skin. She was feverish, but not critically so. The bleeding had stopped, though infection was still a risk. You need proper rest, proper food, but you will live. I told her that, Tai said from the doorway. Nathaniel turned to look at him properly. You saved her life. Both their lives. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. Nathaniel straightened. I do not know why you stopped to help, but I am grateful you did. The world needs more men like you. Tai's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. The world has men like me. It chooses not to see them. Before Nathaniel could respond, Conrad stepped forward. He pulled the carved bird from his pocket and held it out to Tai. I think this belonged to you, he said. Or to someone you know. Tai took the bird with shaking hands. He turned it over, examining every detail. The rough cuts, the way the wings were slightly uneven, the small mark near the tail where the knife had slipped. His throat worked. Where did you get this? I found it in the bunkhouse at Cole's ranch. The man who lived there before me said a little girl made it. An Indian girl. Cole told everyone he was taking her to a mission school, but he sold her instead. To a house in Denver. Tai's knuckles went white where he gripped the bird. What was her name? Little Dove. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Tai stared at the bird in his hand, and Nathaniel saw something break behind those dark eyes, something that had been holding him together for 6 long years. My sister, Tai whispered. This is my sister's work. I taught her to carve when she was 7. She made one exactly like this before. His voice broke. Before they took her, Evangeline reached out and touched his arm. Tai. He pulled away, turning toward the door as if he might run. But there was nowhere to go. Nowhere that would erase what he had just learned. His sister had been here, had been at Cole's ranch, had made this bird in the last place she had known before being sold into a life he could not bear to imagine. And he had been so close. If he had searched harder, asked more questions, been braver. It is not your fault, Evangeline said quietly. You do not know that. Yes, I do. Because I know what it is like to be powerless, to have your choices taken from you, to be treated like property. She stood moving slowly and walked to his side. Your sister did not need you to be perfect. She needed you to remember her. And you did. For 6 years you remembered. You searched. You never stopped looking. But I did not find her. Maybe you still can. Nathaniel cleared his throat. There is an address. 1247 Larimer Street in Denver. That is where Cole sent her. If we move quickly, she is already dead. Tai's voice was flat. 6 years. No child survives 6 years in a place like that. You do not know that for certain. I know enough. But even as he said it, Tai clutched the bird tighter. Hope was a dangerous thing. It had sustained him for 6 years, driving him forward when logic said to give up. Now it was kindling a new fire in his chest, hotter and more painful than anything he had felt before. If there was even a chance, even the smallest possibility that little Dove was still alive. "We have to go back to Copper Creek," Nathaniel said. "All of us. Cole thinks Evangeline is dead. If we can get to the marshal before Cole realizes she is alive, we can bring charges against him. Attempted murder, fraud. And if we can prove he sold your sister—" "You have proof?" Tayi asked sharply. Nathaniel pulled out the ledger. "Cole keeps records, very detailed records. He thinks no one will ever see them, so he wrote down everything, including a payment received for delivering an Indian girl to Denver." Tayi took the ledger and read the entry. His hands trembled. "This is enough. Combined with Conrad's testimony and Evangeline's story, yes, it is enough. Then we go to Copper Creek, tonight." "It is too dangerous," Conrad said. "Cole will have men watching the roads. If he sees us coming, then we do not take the roads." Tayi moved to the wall and took down a map he had drawn from memory, a detailed rendering of the terrain between the cabin and Copper Creek. "There is a trail through the high country. No one uses it in winter, but it is passable. We can reach Copper Creek without being seen." Evangeline looked at him. "Tayi, if we go back, they will try to kill you. You know that, right? Jebediah will claim you kidnapped me. He will turn the whole town against you. Let him try." Tayi's voice was cold as the wind outside. "I have spent 6 years running from white men's justice. I am done running. If they want to hang me, they will have to catch me first. And if they catch me, I will make certain Jebediah Cole hangs beside me." Nathaniel and Conrad exchanged glances. This was spinning out of control faster than either had anticipated. But there was no going back now. The moment they had walked into this cabin, they had committed themselves to seeing this through to whatever end awaited. "All right," Nathaniel said. "We go together, but we do this smart. We go to the marshal first before Cole knows we are in town. We present the evidence. We let the law handle it. And if the law does not handle it," Nathaniel's jaw tightened, "then we will." They spent the rest of the night preparing. Tayi showed Conrad how to wrap a horse's hooves in cloth to muffle sound. Nathaniel repacked his medical bag, making sure he had everything he might need for a long, cold ride. Evangeline nursed Mabel and tried not to think about what awaited them in Copper Creek. Just before dawn, as they were about to leave, Evangeline pulled Tayi aside. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for stopping, for saving us, for—" "You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do. Because you did not have to do any of this. You could have ridden past. You could have left us at the cabin and gone to Denver alone. But you did not." She reached up and touched his face, a brief, gentle touch that made him go very still. "You are a good man, Tayi. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that." He looked at her for a long moment, this small, fierce woman who had crawled through snow with her baby rather than surrender to death. "You are steel," he said finally. "Remember that when things get bad. You are steel and you do not break." Then he turned and walked to his horse, because if he stayed any longer, he might say something he was not ready to say. Something about how she had become important to him in ways he did not fully understand. How the thought of her going back to Cole made him want to burn the world. How holding her daughter made him ache for the sister he had lost and the family he might never have. But those were thoughts for another time, another world. Right now, they had to survive. They rode out as the sun was rising, 4 souls bound together by trauma and determination. Behind them, the cabin stood empty once more, waiting for the next desperate traveler to find shelter in its walls. Ahead, Copper Creek waited, and with it Jebediah Cole. The ride to Copper Creek took 2 days instead of 1, because they could not risk being seen. Tayi led them through country that would have killed anyone less familiar with the land, narrow defiles where the snow had drifted to the height of a man frozen in waterfalls. They had to skirt carefully slopes so steep that the horses slid down on their haunches. But they made it. On the evening of the second day, they crested a rise and saw the lights of Copper Creek spread below them like fallen stars. "We wait for full dark," Thais said. "Then we go to the marshal." They hunkered down in a copse of trees and waited. Evangeline nursed Mabel, who had been remarkably quiet throughout the journey, as if the baby understood that survival depended on silence. Conrad cleaned his rifle for the third time, his hand steady now that action was imminent. Nathaniel reviewed his mental inventory of evidence, making sure he had not forgotten any crucial detail. And Thais simply stared at the town, his dark eyes fixed on the largest building on the main street. Cole's warehouse. Cole's empire. Cole's stolen life, built on the bones of women and children. Soon, Thais thought. Soon you will answer for what you have done. When the moon rose, they descended into the valley. They left the horses tied in an alley behind the livery stable and approached the marshal's office on foot. The lights were on, which meant Marshal Hayes was still working. Nathaniel knocked. The door opened to reveal a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a salt-and-pepper beard and eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. "Dr. Ward, what brings you out at this hour?" "Evidence of murder, Marshal, and fraud, and child slavery. Can we come in?" Hayes stepped aside, his hand resting instinctively on the revolver at his hip. His eyes swept over the group, lingering on Thais for a long, measuring moment, before moving to Evangeline and the baby. "You are Cole's missing bride," he said. "I am. And I am not missing. I was left to die." Evangeline's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "My husband threw me in the snow after I gave birth to a daughter. He meant for us to freeze. But Thais found me and saved my life." Hayes looked at Thais again. "You are the Cheyenne who has been asking about a missing girl?" "My sister, Little Dove. Jebediah Cole sold her to a brothel in Denver 6 years ago. I have proof." Nathaniel laid the ledger on the marshal's desk. "This is Cole's own record of transactions. He details the sale right here, along with the names of 7 women he has brought west as brides. 5 of them are dead. 2 supposedly left of their own accord, but I think if you dig deeper, you will find bodies." Hayes picked up the ledger and began reading. His face darkened with each line. "Holy Mother of, where did you get this?" "From Cole's house. I broke in and took it." "That is illegal, Doctor." "So is murder." Hayes continued reading in silence. When he finished, he set the ledger down carefully and looked at each of them in turn. "This is serious. If even half of what is written here is true, it is all true," Conrad said quietly. "I was there for 2 of the deaths, including Evangeline's attempted murder. I drove the wagon that dumped her in the snow." "Then you are an accomplice?" "Yes." Conrad's voice was steady. "And I am willing to testify to everything I have seen. I am willing to hang for it if that is what justice demands. But Cole must hang first." Hayes sat back in his chair and ran a hand over his face. "This is going to cause a firestorm. Cole has friends in the territorial government. He employs half this town. If I move against him without ironclad proof—" "You have the proof," Nathaniel interrupted. "You have the ledger. You have Conrad's testimony. You have Evangeline standing here alive when Cole told everyone she ran away. What more do you need? A judge who will not be intimidated. A jury that will convict a rich white man for crimes against women and Indians." Hayes looked at Thais. "No offense, son, but you know as well as I do how this territory works. Justice is not blind. It has preferences." "Then make it see," Thais said quietly. "Or I will go to Cole myself and end this my own way." The threat hung in the air. Hayes studied Thais for a long moment, then sighed. "Give me until morning. I will ride to the territorial capital and bring back a federal marshal. Someone who does not owe Cole any favors. We will do this by the book. And if Cole runs before morning, he will not. He thinks he is untouchable. Hayes stood. In the meantime, you all stay here. Do not go back to your homes. Do not let anyone see you. If Cole finds out you are alive. He looked at Evangeline. He will finish what he started. They spent the night in the marshal's office, taking turns sleeping while someone always stood watch. Evangeline dozed fitfully with Mabel curled against her chest. Conrad sat in a corner carving a new bird from a scrap of wood Ty had given him. Nathaniel wrote down everything he could remember, creating a narrative that would stand up in court. And Ty stood by the window, watching the street for any sign of movement. The carved bird was in his pocket, pressed against his heart. Little Dove's bird. Proof that she had been here. Proof that she had survived long enough to leave a piece of herself behind. He would find her. Or he would find her grave. But either way, he would know. And Jebediah Cole would pay. Dawn came gray and cold. Marshal Hayes saddled his horse and rode out at first light, heading for the territorial capital. The streets began to fill with the usual morning traffic. Shopkeepers opening their doors, miners heading to the claims, children running errands. And then around mid-morning, everything went to hell. The door to the marshal's office slammed open. Hatchet Harry stood in the opening, his pale eyes scanning the room. Behind him were 6 men, all armed, all with the look of hired guns. "Well, well," Harry said softly. "Looks like the marshal was hiding some interesting guests." Nathaniel stood his hand, moving toward his revolver. "This is a lawful detention. You have no authority here. Do not need authority. Got a job. Mr. Cole wants his property back." Harry's eyes fixed on Evangeline. "The woman and the baby." "No." Evangeline said, her voice shaking but firm. "Was not asking, ma'am." Ty stepped between Harry and Evangeline, his Winchester coming up in one smooth motion. "You take one step closer, you die." Harry smiled. It was a terrible smile, empty of anything human. "Indian, you are already dead. You just do not know it yet." The standoff held for one long, breathless moment. Then Conrad raised his Springfield and pointed it at Harry's chest. "I have done a lot of things I am not proud of," Conrad said. "But I will not stand by while you drag that woman back to the man who tried to kill her. You want her, you go through me." Harry's smile widened. "That can be arranged." Then all hell broke loose. The siege. The first shot came from outside a rifle round that punched through the window and buried itself in the wall 6 inches from Nathaniel's head. Glass exploded inward. Evangeline screamed and dove for cover, curling her body around Mabel. Ty returned fire through the broken window, his Winchester barking 3 times in quick succession. Someone outside howled in pain. More shots answered, coming from multiple directions now. Cole had not just sent Harry, he had sent an army. "They have us surrounded," Nathaniel shouted over the gunfire. He crawled to where Evangeline huddled and threw his body over hers and Mabel's, trying to shield them with his own flesh. Conrad fired his Springfield, then cursed as he tried to reload. The old rifle was single-shot, slow to operate under pressure. A bullet clipped the doorframe beside his head, showering him with splinters. Ty moved to the back door and kicked it open. "We have to move, now. We stay here, we die." "Move where?" Nathaniel demanded. "They have the street covered. There is an alley behind the general store. Leads to the creek. If we can reach the water." Another volley of shots. This time one found Conrad punching through his shoulder and spinning him around. He hit the floor, hard blood spreading across his shirt. "Conrad." Evangeline tried to go to him, but Nathaniel held her back. "I am all right." Conrad gasped, though his face was gray with pain. "Just a scratch." It was not just a scratch. Nathaniel could see that from across the room. The bullet had gone clean through, which was good, but it had hit something important. Conrad was bleeding fast. "Can you walk?" Tai asked. Conrad pushed himself to his feet, swaying. "I can run if I have to." They moved as a group, Conrad in the middle, supported by Tai and Nathaniel Evangeline, clutching Mabel and bringing up the rear. They burst out the back door into chaos. The alley was narrow and choked with barrels and crates. Tai led them through it at a dead run, his rifle up and ready. Behind them, Harry and his men gave chase, their boots pounding on the frozen ground. A shot rang out. The bullet struck a barrel beside Evangeline's head, spraying her with splinters. She stumbled but kept running, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Mabel was screaming now, a high, terrified sound that cut through everything else. They reached the creek, a narrow ribbon of water running through the center of town. The banks were steep and icy, treacherous to navigate. Tai slid down first, then reached up to take Mabel from Evangeline so she could descend without dropping the baby. Conrad tried to follow. His foot slipped on the ice. He went down hard, his injured shoulders slamming into the frozen ground. He did not make a sound, but Nathaniel saw the way his eyes rolled back in his head. "Leave me," Conrad said when he could breathe again. "I will only slow you down." "Not a chance." Tai grabbed him by the good arm and hauled him upright. "You do not get to die until you testify." They followed the creek out of town, moving as fast as Conrad's injury allowed. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded as Harry's men lost the trail in the network of ice and shadows. But they could not keep running forever. Conrad's wound was bleeding badly, despite Nathaniel's attempts to bandage it on the move. Evangeline was exhausted, her body still recovering from childbirth and exposure. And Mabel needed warmth and food and safety, none of which they had. "The cabin," Tai said suddenly. "The trapper's cabin. We go back there." "That is 2 days' ride," Nathaniel protested. "We make it in one. We have to." So they rode, pushing the horses to their limits, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Conrad grew paler with each mile, slumped forward in the saddle and held upright only by Tai's grip on his coat. Evangeline's lips turned blue from cold. Mabel's cries grew weaker, then stopped altogether, a silence that terrified Evangeline more than any scream. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting. Tai kicked the door open and carried Conrad inside, laying him near the stove. Nathaniel began working immediately, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt and probing the wound. "How bad?" Tai asked. "Bad." Nathaniel's face was grim. "The bullet nicked an artery. He has lost a lot of blood. I can try to stitch it, but..." "Do it." While Nathaniel operated, Tai built up the fire and helped Evangeline get Mabel warm and fed. The baby latched on with desperate hunger, and Evangeline closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "We cannot keep doing this," she whispered. "We cannot keep running. Eventually Cole will find us, and when he does..." "He will not find us," Tai said firmly. "Not here. This place is hidden, and by tomorrow, Marshal Hayes will be back with help." "You do not know that." "I know we are not dead yet. That is enough." But even as he said it, Tai felt doubt gnawing at him. They had pushed their luck too far. They were injured, exhausted, hunted. How much longer could they possibly hold out? The answer came sooner than expected. Conrad woke around midnight, his eyes fever-bright. "They are coming," he whispered. "What?" "Cole, Harry, I can hear them. They followed us." He tried to sit up, but Nathaniel pushed him back down. "You are delirious. There is no one..." Then Tai heard it too. The distant sound of horses. Multiple horses moving through the night with purpose. "How?" Evangeline breathed. "How did they find us?" Conrad's laugh was bitter. "I told them. Back in town before the shooting started. Harry asked where you had been hiding. I tried not to answer, but he threatened to kill the doctor if I did not talk. So I told him about the cabin." "You," Nathaniel started, but Conrad cut him off. "I am sorry. I was afraid. I have always been afraid." That is why I am here bleeding in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. Because I was too afraid to do the right thing 6 years ago when it mattered. Then do the right thing now, Cheyenne said quietly. He handed Conrad his rifle. Can you shoot? I can shoot. They had perhaps 10 minutes before Cole's men reached the cabin. Cheyenne used every second of it, barricading the door with furniture, checking ammunition, positioning Conrad, where he had a clear line of sight through the window. They will try to burn us out, Cheyenne said. If they get close enough to the walls, they will not get close. Conrad's voice was steady now, almost calm. I owe you all a debt. I owe Anna's memory a debt. Let me pay it. Before anyone could stop him, Conrad stood and walked to the door. He unbarred it and stepped outside into the frozen night. Conrad, no, Evangeline screamed, but he was already gone. Cheyenne rushed to the window in time to see Conrad walking toward the approaching riders, his rifle held loosely in his good hand. The blood from his shoulder had soaked through the bandages and was dripping into the snow, leaving a dark trail behind him. Cole, Conrad shouted. Jebediah Cole, come out and face me like a man instead of sending your dogs. The riders stopped. There was a moment of confused silence. Then a figure dismounted and walked forward. Even in the darkness, Cheyenne could see the bulk of him and the way he moved with the confidence of a man who had never been truly challenged. Jebediah Cole. Conrad, Cole said almost conversationally. You have been busy. I have been a coward, Conrad replied. For 6 years I have been a coward. I watched you kill women. I watched you sell a child. I helped you throw Evangeline in the snow like she was garbage. I have done terrible things because I was too afraid to stand up to you. And now you think standing here bleeding is going to make up for all that? No, but maybe dying will. Conrad raised his rifle. He got off one shot wild nowhere near Cole before Hatchet Harry fired. The bullet took Conrad in the chest, punching clean through. He staggered, but did not fall. There are papers, Conrad said, his voice fading. The marshal has them. Proof of everything you have done. You cannot stop it now. Even if you kill all of us, the truth will come out. Cole drew his revolver and shot Conrad twice more. The German fell to his knees, then onto his face. The snow around him turned black in the moonlight. Inside the cabin, Evangeline pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Nathaniel gripped his revolver with white-knuckled hands. And Cheyenne simply stared at the place where Conrad had fallen, feeling something cold and hard settle in his chest. Cole walked to Conrad's body and kicked it once, making sure he was dead. Then he turned toward the cabin. Cheyenne, he shouted, I know you are in there. Send out the woman and the baby, and I will let you live. He is lying, Cheyenne said quietly. The moment we open that door, he kills us all. Then what do we do? Cheyenne checked his rifle. 14 rounds left, plus the revolver he had taken from the marshal's office. 20 rounds total against at least 8 men. We fight, he said. The final battle. The siege began at dawn. Cole's men surrounded the cabin, taking positions behind trees and rocks. They did not rush in, they did not need to. All they had to do was wait. Eventually, the people inside would run out of water or ammunition or hope. But Cole had underestimated 2 things. First, that Cheyenne was a warrior who had spent his entire life preparing for fights he could not win. And second, that Evangeline Marsh had discovered something during her time in the cabin, something stronger than fear or despair. She had discovered rage. The first man to approach the cabin did so cautiously, using the trees for cover. He made it to within 20 yards before Cheyenne's Winchester spoke. The man went down hard, clutching his leg and screaming. The others pulled back, reassessing. They will try to burn us out, Cheyenne said. When it gets dark, they will throw torches at the roof. Then we need to break the siege before dark, Nathaniel said. But how? Evangeline looked down at Mabel, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos. I will go out, she said quietly. What? Jebediah wants me. That is what this is about. He wants to silence me before I can testify. So I will go to him. You will die, Tai said flatly. Maybe. But maybe not. Maybe if he thinks he has won, he will let you go. She looked at Tai, her eyes fierce. You have to survive. You have to find your sister. That is more important than my life. No. The word came out harder than Tai intended. Nothing is more important than your life. Not my sister, not revenge, nothing. Evangeline blinked, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Tai, you do not get to sacrifice yourself. Not after everything, not after surviving. I will not allow it. You do not have a say in, yes, I do. Tai grabbed her shoulders, his face inches from hers. You are steel. Remember, you do not break. You do not give up. And you do not walk out that door and give Cole exactly what he wants. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the air between them crackling with unspoken things. Then, Evangeline's eyes filled with tears. I am so tired of being afraid, she whispered. I know, so am I. Tai's grip softened. But we do not face fear by giving in to it. We face it by fighting. Together. A bullet smashed through the window, ending the moment. They dove apart, scrambling for cover. Outside, Cole's voice rose in fury. That is it. I am done waiting. Harry, burn them out. Men moved toward the cabin, carrying torches. Tai fired again, dropping one of them. But there were too many. They threw the torches at the roof, at the walls, anywhere they could reach. Within minutes, smoke began seeping through the gaps in the logs. We have to get out. Nathaniel coughed. The smoke will kill us before the fire does. Tai looked at Evangeline, then at Mabel, then at the flaming roof. He thought of little Dove, of all the years he had spent searching, of the promise he had made to himself that he would find her or die trying. But some promises, he realized, were less important than others. Some promises had to be broken so that new ones could be made. The back door, he said. On my signal, we run for the trees. Nathaniel, you carry Mabel. Evangeline, stay between us. I will cover the rear. Tai, they will kill you, Evangeline said. Maybe, but you will live, and that is enough. He kissed her, then quick and fierce and desperate. It was not a promise of forever. It was a goodbye. And then he shoved her toward the door before she could protest. Go! They burst out into chaos. Tai laid down covering fire, his Winchester barking again and again. Men dove for cover. One of them, Harry, damn him, got off a shot that creased Tai's ribs hot and burning. But Tai did not stop. He kept firing until the rifle clicked empty, then drew his revolver and fired that too. Nathaniel and Evangeline ran for the trees. Behind them, the cabin was fully ablaze now, flames licking at the sky. Smoke billowed in great black clouds. Cole stepped into the open, his own revolver raised. Tai, you want to know what happened to your sister? You want to know where she died? I will tell you right before I put a bullet in your skull. Tai turned. Their eyes met across the burning wreckage of the cabin. And in that moment, Tai understood. Conrad had said Cole sold little Dove. But what if he had not sold her right away? What if he had kept her at the ranch for a time long enough for her to carve a bird and hide it in the bunkhouse? Long enough for her to realize that no rescue was coming. You kept her at the ranch, Tai said. How long? Cole smiled. 3 months. Would have kept her longer, but she was too much trouble. Always crying, always asking for her brother. So I got rid of her. Made $50 off the transaction. Best decision I ever made. Something inside Tai snapped. He charged across the snow, roaring. Cole fired. The bullet took Tai in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. But he did not fall. He kept coming, driven by 6 years of rage and loss and helpless fury. They collided like bulls tumbling into the snow. Tai's revolver went flying. Cole's did too. They fought with fists and teeth and anything they could reach, brutal, ugly, desperate. Cole was heavier, stronger, but Tai was faster, and he fought with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. He got his hands around Cole's throat and squeezed. Cole's face turned purple. His eyes bulged. He clawed at Tai's hands, drawing blood, but Tai's grip only tightened. "This is for my sister," Tai hissed. "This is for Evangeline. This is for every person you have ever hurt." Cole's struggles weakened. His hands fell away. His eyes rolled back. And then a shot rang out. Tai felt the impact, a hammer blow to his back that drove the air from his lungs. He looked down and saw blood spreading across the snow beneath him. A lot of blood. Too much blood. He turned his head and saw Hatchet Harry standing 10 feet away, smoke rising from his rifle. "Nothing personal, Indian," Harry said. "Just business." Tai tried to rise, but his legs would not work. The world was graying at the edges. He heard Evangeline screaming his name, heard gunfire, heard Marshal Hayes shouting orders as federal marshals poured into the clearing late, too late, always too late. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Evangeline running toward him. Mabel clutched to her chest, her face twisted with anguish. And then nothing. Aftermath. Tai woke 3 days later in Dr. Ward's clinic. The pain hit him first, a bone-deep ache that radiated from his back through his entire body. Then awareness returned in pieces. The smell of carbolic acid, the sound of a baby crying, voices speaking in low, urgent tones. He tried to sit up. A hand pressed him back down, gentle but firm. "Do not move," Evangeline said. "You will tear the stitches." He blinked, bringing her face into focus. She looked exhausted, her hair hanging in lank strands and dark circles under her eyes. But she was alive. And Mabel, he could see the baby sleeping in a basket near the window, was alive too. "Cole," he managed to ask. "Dead. You killed him." "Harry is in custody along with 3 of his men. The others ran." Evangeline's voice was flat, emotionless. "Marshal Hayes came back with federal marshals. They found the ledger, Conrad's testimony, everything. Cole's empire is being dismantled as we speak. Conrad, dead." This time there was emotion, grief and guilt. "He died so we could live." Tai closed his eyes. He thought of the German immigrant who had carved birds in the night and finally found his courage at the end. He was a good man. At the last. Yes. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Evangeline spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a letter. In Cole's things. From a woman named Sarah in Denver. She runs a boarding house on Larimer Street. She wrote to Cole 3 months ago asking if he wanted to know that little Dove had passed away. Consumption. She died in February. The words hit Tai like a physical blow. He had known on some level that 6 years was too long, that the chances of finding his sister alive were almost non-existent. But knowing and having it confirmed were 2 different things. Does the letter say did she suffer? Sarah said she was kind to her, that she bought little Dove's contract from the brothel after 2 years and brought her to the boarding house. That little Dove worked as a seamstress and was well liked, that she asked for you every day until the very end. Evangeline's voice broke. "I am so sorry, Tai." He said nothing, could say nothing. The weight of 6 years of searching and hoping and fighting came crashing down on him all at once. Little Dove was gone, had been gone for months while he was searching, would never know that he had looked for her, would never know that he had never stopped. Evangeline took his hand. "She knew you loved her. Sarah said she kept a carving of a horse that you made for her when she was 10. She kept it until the day she died. She knew." Tai's throat closed. He thought of little Dove as he had last seen her 12 years old, reaching for him as the soldiers dragged her away. He thought of all the years she had spent in hell while he was free. The injustice of it threatened to choke him. "I should have done more," he whispered. "You did everything you could." It was not enough. It never is. But that does not mean it did not matter. Evangeline squeezed his hand. "You saved me. You saved Mabel. Because of you, we have a chance at a life. That matters, Tai. Your sister would say it matters." He looked at her, then really looked. And he saw not the broken woman he had found in the snow, but someone who had been tested by fire and emerged as something harder, stronger. Steel, he had called her. And he had been right. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we heal. Both of us." And then, she trailed off uncertain. "And then," Evangeline met his eyes, "and then we decide what kind of life we want to build. Together if you want, or separately if that is what you need. But either way we survive. We have come too far to do anything else." Tai thought about that. Thought about the future, uncertain and frightening and full of possibilities he had never considered. Thought about Mabel, who would grow up in a world slightly less cruel because of what they had done. Thought about little Dove, who had died, but would not be forgotten. "Together," he said finally. "I choose together." Evangeline smiled, small and tentative, but real. "Then together it is." Epilogue. 3 years later, on a spring morning when the prairie grass was coming back to life and the mountains were white with late snow, a small group gathered by the river on what had once been Jebediah Cole's ranch. The land belonged to Evangeline, now granted to her by court order after Cole's crimes came to light. She had sold most of it to neighboring ranchers, keeping only the river bend and enough pasture to support a small herd of cattle. It was not much, but it was hers. Truly hers in a way that nothing had ever been before. Tai stood beside her, their hands clasped. He still wore his Cheyenne braids, still spoke with an accent that marked him as other. But he had found a kind of peace here, working the land and teaching Mabel to ride before she could properly walk. The little girl, 3 years old now, with her mother's pale eyes and her father's dark hair, played at the water's edge, with a carved horse that Tai had made for her. It looked remarkably like the one he had made for little Dove all those years ago. Dr. Nathaniel was there, too older and grayer, but still practicing medicine in Copper Creek. He had become a kind of advocate for the women who came west, looking for new lives, making sure they knew their rights, making sure they had somewhere to turn if things went wrong. And there was a new grave on the hillside above the river. They had brought Conrad's body back from the cabin and buried him with full honors, a headstone that read simply, "He found his courage at the last." But the marker they had come to dedicate today was different. It stood a little ways from Conrad's, carved from local stone, and bearing the name Little Dove in both English and Cheyenne. Beneath the name was a carved bird with outstretched wings. Tai had carved it himself, working through the winter evenings while Evangeline mended clothes and Mabel slept. It was the finest thing. He had ever made a monument to a sister he had lost, and a promise that she would not be forgotten. Red Hawk stepped forward, now the elder of his band. He spoke in Cheyenne words that honored little Dove's memory and asked the spirits to guide her on her journey. Then he nodded to Tai. Tai placed the original carved bird, the one Conrad had kept, the one little Dove had made in the bunkhouse so many years ago, at the base of the stone. His hands shook as he did it. "I am sorry I could not save you," he said quietly. "I am sorry I was not there when you needed me. But I promise you this, your story will be remembered. The things that were done to you, the evil that men like Cole brought into this world, will not be forgotten. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that what happened to you never happens to another child. Not if I can stop it." Evangeline stepped forward and laid a bouquet of wildflowers beside the bird. "We did not know you," she said. "But you saved my life anyway." Because your brother never stopped looking for you. Because your memory made him into the kind of man who could not ride past someone in need. Thank you, little dove, for making him who he is. Mabel, who did not fully understand what was happening, but sensed the solemnity of it, placed her own small offering at the grave, a handful of river stones she had collected that morning. They stood in silence for a long time, these survivors of trauma and cruelty, and a world that had tried to break them. But they had not broken. They had bent and scarred and changed, but they had not broken, and that in the end was its own kind of victory. Later, after the others had left, and Mabel was napping in the house, Evangeline and Tai stood together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Do you think she knows?" Evangeline asked. "Wherever she is, do you think she knows we are thinking of her?" "I do not know," Tai admitted, "but I hope so. I have to hope so." Evangeline leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her. They had been married for a year now, a quiet ceremony presided over by a circuit judge who did not care about the color of their skin or the scandal their union might cause. They had built a life together, one hard day at a time, and it was not perfect. But it was theirs. "Mabel asked me yesterday where her real father was," Evangeline said quietly. Tai went still. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth, that the man who helped make her left us to die in the snow, and that you found us and saved us and chose to be her father even though you did not have to. I told her that family is not always about blood. Sometimes it is about choice." "What did she say?" Evangeline smiled. She said, "Good, I like this better." Tai felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had been carrying since the day he found Evangeline in the snow. He had not known if he had the right to call himself Mabel's father, had not known if she would accept him when she was old enough to understand. But children, he was learning, were wiser than adults sometimes. They saw things more clearly. They understood that love was a choice, and that the best choices were the ones made freely. "I like this better too," he said quietly. They stood together as the sun slipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not a threat, just a song. And in the house behind them, their daughter slept safe and warm and loved. It was not the ending either of them had imagined, but it was the one they had built together, brick by brick, choice by choice, out of the ruins of the lives that had been taken from them, and it was enough.